great.
Can hear you, sir.
Great. Good, good evening, everyone, and welcome to yet another edition of our series of webinars. And for those of you who have joined us before, you're welcome back. You will recall that we've had a number of these webinars in the past, and we took a little break from them, but I think we are now back to them again. For those of you who are joining us for the first time, a very warm welcome to you from wherever it is you might be joining us from. It promises to be a very interesting evening, and we can't thank you enough for choosing to spend your evening with us this way. Right, so the topic before us is very straightforward, and that is the topic of substances in the workplace. Some of us will call them drugs. Other people will call yes, you will say recreational substances. But whatever you choose to call them, I think we are all clear about, what we're talking about. I won't take that for granted. And as we journey on into the webinar, we will be understanding more what these substances are and why we should be worried about them, which substances are relevant in the workplace, why are they relevant, and we will be looking at that from the multiple angles of human resource, mental health, obviously workplace health, occupational health. The discussants have all been introduced, and I welcome you all again, Dr. Shola Lokere, Dr. Ayonate Ephraim, and Mrs. Omotola Adedapo. Right, so let's get on into it very, very quickly. Right, so Dr. Ephraim, I think I would like to start with you. Um, Firstly, you've been involved in workplace substance use issues, and I listened from your bio that you are on the working committee of the Society of Occupational Medicine in the UK. Let us understand what sort of drugs, or shall I say substances, are we even talking about in the workplace?
Okay, thank you very much, and good evening, everyone who has found time to join this evening. I think it's a fantastic opportunity for all of us to share knowledge. As discussants, we do not have all the facts, all the information with us, but we are also going to learn this evening, and I think it's a continuous learning. It's one of the things I love doing. So it's a good one. Essentially, yes, I am a member of the UK Faculty of Occupational Medicine Drug and Alcohol Committee. We used to call it Drug and Alcohol Committee, and then we've had to change the name to Substance Misuse Committee, just to have a broader view of, substances in the workplace. So the kind of substances we normally consider usually are illegal drugs. These are drugs that are prohibited by law, such as cocaine, heroin, marijuana, in some, places, methamphetamine, ecstasy, and, within that range of illegal drugs. We also on the list are prescription drugs, which can be misused or abused, such as opioids, sedatives, or stimulants. And this can be of concern if employees are using them without legitimate medical or reason, in a manner not prescribed by any healthcare professional. The other ones we consider also alcohol. While not a drug in the traditional sense, alcohol is a substance that can impair judgment and performance. And therefore, that makes it a concern if employees consume it excessively or during working hours. The other ones are legal recreational drugs, and in some areas, the use of marijuana or other recreational drugs may be legal, but their use can still be problematic if, they impair an employee's ability to perform their job safely and effectively. So in a sense, that's
So,
just.
Dr.
Can you
Ephraim,
hear
let
me?
me stop you there. Yes, I can hear you. I can hear you. I wanted
Yeah.
to stop you there for just a moment so I can jump on Dr. Shalalo Kere. And thank you for taking us through the different types of substances that we could be talking about in the workplace. So for you, or to you, Dr. Lokere, we've heard Dr. Ayana Tefrem. Why are these substances that important? Why are they that important in the workplace?
Thank you very much. Thank you. And thank you for having me on one of these very informative and educative programs. Your question is a very straight one. Why are we concerned? Why are we having this conversation? It's just around the global burden that alcohol addiction and illicit use of these substances has caused over the years. It's had huge impact in employee wellness. It's had huge impact on productivity level, which then have a greater impact on the GDP production of a country as a whole. It's had a wide-ranging impact on people's overall general health. Issues around addictions, alcohol, illicit substances contribute a significant 5% to overall death from diseases. And if I'm to break this down, so hypertension, diabetes, anything, all those other conditions, globally, there is alcohol and addiction contributes to death of 5% of all those other illnesses. So I think it's an important thing that we need to discuss. We need to educate people about it. It's going to have a better impact in terms of workplace, people's overall health and well-being will also improve. So yes, I'll pause for now.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Dr. Lokere. Just a little bit of housekeeping information for everybody. The organizer will mute all of us. They will mute us for voice, and they will take down our cameras. So please do not override that by trying to unmute yourself or trying to put on your own camera so that we can all enjoy the webinar. Another thing to very quickly say, we will have question and answers at the end of the webinar itself. So sometime around 10 minutes past 7 p.m., we will open up the chat box to look at what questions you may have done there. So this is to encourage everyone who may have one question or the other, or want to make a comment or want to seek a clarification, to please use the chat box function. And sometime towards the end of the webinar, we will be opening that chat box to see what you have put in there. The last bit I need to mention very quickly, very shortly, a poll, I believe there will be 2 of them, will be running, and you will be seeing them come on your screen. They will be asking you simple questions, I believe 2 of them. So it's just for you to just select the applicable answers, and they will feature, about twice during the entire session. And then we will take, the response, we'll look at the response at the end of the webinar. Thank you so much. Mrs. Umotola, I think I will now come to yourself. So we've been talking about substances in the workplace. Dr. Ephraim has told us the types of substances that, are relevant in the workplace, from illicit ones to the legal ones, from recreational ones to prescription medication that are not used the way they should be used. Dr. Olokere has told us the importance of these substances in the workplace. I think what I want to ask you is, as from an HR point of view, how then do you think employers deal with this issue in the workplace? We know the problem, we know what it can cause, but how do you deal with it in the workplace? Your thoughts, please.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ajayi. Once again, standing on all the existing protocols and also joining my colleagues in the House. Thank you for putting this session together. Amazing discussion, and thank you to the speakers who have already spoken ahead. Beautiful question regarding the workplace. I mean, as you know, the doctors have already said in the house, it's a major problem. It's, you know, ravaging the workplace everywhere you turn, and it's important for HR leaders, business owners to be proactive as to how to curb the issue before it becomes full blown. You know, so there are various means, starting with communication. First of all, at the point of recruitment, before, you know, getting into the organization, you already are aware of what the policy is being communicated during the recruitment process. In the course of, you know, hiring and then onboarding, there's also the part of what is being tested. We need to have an idea, what level of exposure does this person have to these illicit drugs? Do you have a medical condition where you constantly have to make use of some of this, even the legal drugs, and to what extent? You know, that is already discussed. So both parties are aware. And in the case of where nothing is picked up at the recruitment process, it is well documented by the policy what the organization's attitude is towards illicit drugs. Obviously, it has to be documented in the policy, and also not just having it in the policy. At the point of entry, you're signing, you know, signing receipt of the handbook or the policy where it states that this and this and this are not allowed. And when you're caught, it is part of what classifies as gross misconduct, which is sanctionable to termination, dismissal, and, you know, all what's not. And then what we also do as an organization in all the places that I've worked, consistent communication is also important. We're constantly doing a campaign on substance abuse, what the impact is, because, you know, you find that not just for the purpose of the organization, to the society at large, it's something that we have a responsibility to ensure that we're doing our own quota in ensuring that people are not engaging in these things, from tobacco to alcohol to the illicit drugs to the psychoactive ones, different things. You worry at how, you know, both young people and older generation are engaged, you know, they're neck deep in addiction to these things, and then they don't even know the boundaries between, I'm at work right now, I need to focus on being productive, I shouldn't engage in this. So constant communication, like I said, we're doing, and not just putting it out there like, oh, some boring information has come. We're being creative about it. We're doing case studies, we're doing short videos, we're doing graphics, we're doing webinars, we're doing, you know, assessment centers, having focus groups and discussing about it. These are things, you know, we do even in my organization today, and, you know, across different places I've worked as well. Another important aspect of this is, you know, in terms of—
Before you take that further, before you take that thought further, thank you, Mrs. Alida, for it's very brilliant. I would hope to come to your organization one day to be able to see these things for myself. It sounds very brilliant already. If you are able to do all of this, and I think you've talked on a lot of things. We will come back to policy in a moment. We will unpack all the things that policy should embody, and we'll come back to that. Quickly go back to Dr. Lokere. You were talking about GDP, we're talking about the national impact of this situation. I came across a publication from the United Nations Office on Drug and Crime, and I think that was a document published in 2018, looking at the activities of 2017. And you will be sobered by the statistics that I'm about to share. It says about 14.4% of people between 15 and 64 in Nigeria, and I'm talking local figures, have used a psychoactive substance in the past year. That translates to 14.3 million people. That's a large number. Now, of this number, the age group between 25 and 39 show the bigger preponderance. It goes on to talk about 1 out of every 4 of these people is a woman. Okay, and then it goes on to talk about 1 of every 5 high-risk drug users. By high-risk drug users, they talk about those who go on to inject drugs. You know, of these drugs that will fall into that category, and that figure is around 400,000. That's very sobering. Is this not a problem of society? Is this a problem of the workplace, Dr. Lokere?
It's a combination of the two, and you know, I'm aware of that article as well. And the first thing that came to mind is that if you had to repeat this study in 2023, in a post-COVID era, where people have further developed addictive tendencies and taking solace in various forms of substance, I'm sure we will be close to doubling those figures that we saw in 2018. And you ask me, is this workplace or global? It is a global problem. It's everybody's problem. It's just having a greater impact at the workplace at the moment. You know, when I look at this issue, I look at it with people with just an addiction problem, or you look at the people with the dual diagnosis. And that is where you see the people who are probably now addicted to painkillers because they've probably been treated with these painkillers before and they've not been able to manage that balance properly. Then you look at those who are just solely addicted on substances. The figures are increasingly becoming alarming, and people are not so aware of the short-term and long-term consequences. You know, the impact on the workplace at this moment, we're looking at, it's still a short-term consequence. When you put into consideration the longer-term impact on their health, on the family life, and all other factors around them, it's a much more bigger problem. Who's going to look after these people when they are even past their reproductive ages, when they're older? They will end up with multiple other physical health challenges that will then compound the thing. A lot of them are going to get into crime. They're going to get into problems in terms of when they commit crime to fund these very expensive habits. So you're talking about impact in terms of crime, in terms of productivity, in terms of political thuggery. You know, you know, we can just keep going on and on and on. It has impact everywhere. And guess what? The age of exposure is gradually getting lower. People are getting exposed at age 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. And that is a big indicator on the impact on the brain. The age of exposure to these chemicals, and I can talk about the chemical side for a lot of things, the THC and the CBD. You see a lot of people with CBD, you take a lot of people buying all these things on the side. They are not sure of the component. A lot of people plant this thing and they conjoin it together in their backyard. And that's where you see the organic cannabis, the non-organic ones, the skunks, the different types. So it is a big problem. And as our HR lady said, we can't do too much of awareness. We need to educate people right from primary school and secondary schools. We need to be talking about these things.
Right, great. Thank you so much.
Can I just add, Larry, can I
was
just
just to you anyway.
Yes, you know, because, you know, it's a very topical thing. And I mean, like in the UK here, if you employ a teenager, you are likely to, you know, 20% of the time, 1 in 5 is likely to be somebody who has used a drug, you know, the previous year. So that is the kind of statistics that is available. So, and like Dr. Olokore said, the age of use, you know, first use is reducing and reducing and reducing. So that by the time you get people who you are going to employ in work, you are most likely to be employing people who are, you know, ready-made drug users. And that's why it becomes more important for employers themselves, you know, in terms of safety issues, you know, the reputation of the companies that are going to employ them, you know, and even public safety, just like Dr. Olowokore said. You then have these drug users are the ones who are more prone to and vulnerable to being used as thugs. So that's why that becomes a problem of public safety. So it's really a big issue, not just necessarily on the impact of, you know, economic costs and the rest of them, but family dynamics, you know, a lot of them, you know, and there are legal issues all cropping up, which is a minefield that people are not exploring yet.
Right. Thank you so much. Thanks for the contribution, Dr. Enate. I said I was coming to you, and I had something in mind that I wanted to ask you. So Mrs. Adedapo talked about policy, and I said I was coming back to her. In fact, I will come back to all of you to talk about the multiple aspects of workplace substance testing policy. But I wanted to ask you, we've talked about all these substances, we've looked at the medical use of even prescription ones. If you were to advise an organization as an occupational health physician, what substances would you be interested in advising to include within their workplace substance testing program?
So usually, a lot of times when workplace drug programs are going to be set up, it's usually tailored most times to the industry. What normally happens is that you will need as an OH practitioner to work with the human resources, the employees, and then you need to have a general background of what substances are commonly used within the environment of where that industry is. And that is what is going to guide what substances that you are going to put in the policy. But essentially what is required is, have a good grasp of what is the problem. So it's almost like you do a scoping. You want to understand what is the problem, what are the substances that are problematic within that, industry and within that population, and then that will guide what what you are going to use. So what most companies will do, like in the UK, is they've got the major ones that they will just pick. So they will talk about alcohol and all the major illegal drugs like cocaine, heroin, and the rest of them. And then they will talk about, they will put into their programs other non-prescription drugs that can also be, influence individuals in the way they do. But in recent times, some companies I know are now coming up with putting, cannabis, especially the medicinal cannabis in their program. So this wasn't there before. It was, but now it's becoming something that, companies are now considering. So in summary, for you to know what substances you are going to put in your policy, or that will be guided, it will be guided by, what the industry is, what the locality is, what is, the common drugs that are most commonly used by employees or within the general population, because you are normally likely to come from the population down to, down to the
workplace.
To the workplace.
Great. Thank you so much, Dr. Ephraim. Mrs. Adedapo, I promised I was coming to you. We talked about, or Dr. Ephraim has just talked about his experience in the UK, okay? And he's very brilliantly shared with us that the way it would normally happen, and I will believe this is across any jurisdiction, will be to understand the local pattern of use and the local prevalence in that society. And it is from there that you will devise your substances to include within your policy. And one of the polls is live, and it is asking the same question I'm about to ask you. In your experience, what would be the common sort of substances that you have come across, whether that is in your company's substance, workplace is not what I'm asking, but in your experience or through your peer interaction, what would you say would be the common sort of substances that you come across in the workplace?
Okay, thank you. Alcohol and tobacco, those are like the majors. But for psychoactive substances and the other hard drugs, very common: cocaine, heroin. There's this one that is very common now. They call it laughing gas. I really don't know what it is they get from there, but they I think nitric oxide. I think that's like the chemical name, but AKA laughing gas. They put it in the balloon and then they puff it and then they just get something from it. And then when you even talk about tobacco, there are different levels. There's the shisha, there's the one they put in pots, different things, you know. But coming back to policy.
Wait. Hold on. You have touched a nerve that I'm sure most of our listeners will be able to relate to. You talked about tobacco. I was looking at you. I didn't stop you. Then you went to talk about shisha that they enjoy every evening over the weekend. Tell me, would you normally be considering that as part of your, workplace substance use testing? Otherwise, I believe many of the people on this call will probably be looking at you funny.
Somebody said Colorado, yes, or Colos. I just saw the chat now. So yeah. So, I just, like you said, everyone can relate. And like I mentioned earlier, it's not just the workplace, it's all over in the society. But then when it comes to the workplace, part of why policies are important, we're here to get the job done. And we don't want you to, because, it's a social thing. Drugs, alcohol and tobacco, it's a social thing. So if it's part of your lifestyle outside of work, you don't want to then bring it into that space. And the things you do are triggered or are controlled by your state of highness. So you had a hangover the night before, or you did some stuff before you left home, and then you're coming to work, you're interacting with people, you're holding sensitive documents, you're in charge of sensitive processes that can, just one little mistake, you press one button and then the company is losing millions, So we know that this is part of you, but part of the reasons why it's important to put a nib on these things when it comes to the work, and then they know the consequences when you break that. Now, speaking about policies, there's also the thing in around diversity and inclusion, how you don't want to unnecessarily discriminate, because to some extent, when you take it back to the labor law of the land, there are some things that are not explicitly stated to say, oh, people do not have a right to do. And when it comes to the workplace, you want to ensure that you're not infringing on the human rights of people, what they have the right to do based on constitutional right to do as humans. You want to ensure that you're being inclusive, you're also still being firm around what happens in your workplace and what does not. There's also the cultural thing. For example, I've worked in multinational organizations, and there you find it's a global village. There are different people from different nationalities. You have Egyptians, you have Americans, you have British guys, people from different continents. And this is a way of life for them. In fact, you find that the other white guys, so some people, many of them can't actually survive 15 minutes without having a smoke. I'm mentioning this because when it comes to the workplace in Nigeria, to a large extent, some organizations have opened their doors. They've taken out the global borders. So you're going to have a workforce that's a mixed race, that's a mixed generation, a mixed race. You also want to ensure that you're not stepping those cultural bounds. And when you have such situations, part of what we've done. Are you saying something?
Sorry,
Okay,
yes, I am saying something.
Okay,
and
okay.
I will invite both Dr. Ephraim and Dr. Olokere to answer me if I'm about to say something that is not right. In my experience, I'll share one with you. I was going to collect a sample from a customer many years ago. And like you rightly said, the employer is a multinational employer, and they've got people from all over the place. There's a particular gentleman in this company who is from Netherlands, and he has always been, well, according to the HSC person in the company, he has always been seen to be evading the sample collection process.
The testing.
Okay? It's notorious for that. Anytime somebody comes from the company I work for to collect the sample, he will seize in a meeting. And it's a very, very senior member of staff. Eventually, we succeeded in collecting the sample from this person. And if you know anything, I believe you will, about the Dutch, they are very, very liberal with the use of cannabis.
Yeah.
And this person obviously tested, positive for that substance. And the question is, are there not considerations for jurisdictions and laws of the land in which you are operating, regardless of the culture, the practices, or whatever laws operate in other people's countries? So your thoughts on that, and that's to all of you, really.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Can I go first, please?
Yes,
Go ahead.
I've been writing down. I've written a lot of things down. So I think I will start from a point whereby I have been privileged to practice in various parts of the world, and that is to your question, Dr. Jai, that yes, in some places the use of the drug is not the problem. It's about, is it being used safely, or has it now crept to the level of addiction, where we have the 4 C's, the compulsion, the craving, the consequence, and the control. When an individual has lost control, is not aware of consequences, that is when where some jurisdictions, possibly like the Netherlands, are able to say, wow, this is becoming to impact on your work, day-to-day functioning, livelihood, and then they can become very, very hard on that. But hey, it's different for different places. And how are people able to recognize when things are getting out of control? I think that's a very thin line there, and that is why I am in favor of those very stringent policies in some region that says it's probably a zero tolerance for it. But the clinician in me would not let me ignore the root cause of drug use to say, how did people get here? Which is something we should not ignore totally. Because it is very, very unlikely if you take 10 people that use drugs and they say, but all of the 10 of us, we woke up one day and we say we want to start smoking weed. No, we're looking at issues around peer pressure of what is happening nowadays. You're looking at issues around anxiety, schoolgirls, schoolboys doing exams and they can't cope with the pressure. You're looking at various issues that could curse socioeconomic status. We don't choose where we were born. Some people were born in the ghetto, whereby the next man down the road is selling the drugs. So we need to, I never lose sight of the root cause. And what we're trying to preach is that organizations should be a bit more flexible and open to supporting people who have inadvertently found themselves in this situation. I know there are a lot of people that do it because of very, very stupid reasons, but don't let us ignore those that are gotten themselves there, not by totally their own doing, so to say. I'm sure a lot of people might not really understand what I'm saying, but I have seen this in clinical practice, and it's still something that is out there. So
I agree with you.
My summary is that I want that to feed into policy-making process, whereby there is a support structure within organization to say, before an employee who is said to be addicted or using drugs indiscriminately, before they face the ultimate consequences of losing their job, they should be supported through programs to see if they can turn a new leaf, give them a better chance, and reinforce what consequence looks like. Because when they die cycle, they forget control, they forget consequences, and they just act. So if that can be fed into the policy, that would be great. I'll stop now. I said I've written a lot of things, but I'll
okay. So Larry, let me just add a little bit there. Can I add something there? Yeah.
Please carry on.
So this is it. There are public health aspects of drug misuse, and there are occupational aspects of drug misuse. So an employer, as an occupational practitioner, OHP, we are looking at how we can support workers. For you to get into work, you have to be employed. The company will set their standard. This is what we want for this employee to come in to do the work. So if British Airways is employing a pilot, okay, they don't have time to go and rehabilitate a pilot before they employ him. What they want to do is they want a clean pilot who they can employ, who will do the job. But I do agree with Dr. Lowokere. The wider burden of drug misuse is in the community. And when we do drug policies for companies, They tell you, this is what we want. So for safety critical duties, they will want to ensure that they do not employ, because it's a business concern. And the way we try to support, individuals will be, if somebody is already in the job and there is a problem, then you can then go ahead, put in mechanisms within the policy to support that individual. But I know most companies I know, I mean, I work for Rolls-Royce, they will not employ somebody who is a known drug addict to rehabilitate him before bringing him in. In fact, by the time he goes through the security process, they would have dropped him off, just on the wayside before he will get in there. So I agree with Dr. Lowokere. The wider body, the wider body we need to consider as, because in the job, in the workplace, you are also thinking about the wider public, populace. But I'm not sure that any employer will want to rehabilitate somebody first, or maybe put something in place to say, okay, let's give him a chance. Let's see whether he will change or he will get better before we employ him. No, I'm not sure they will do it.
Right. Okay. Thank you. Before I let you go, Dr. Ayanate, you said something, and I think this our audience would like to know. You said safety critical. I believe you used the word or the term safety critical. Also understand what sort of jobs or categories of occupations will fall under the terminology of safety critical, and how is that important to the topic we're talking about?
So safety critical jobs are employments in which an individual's functionality as a result of whatever impairment is likely to affect, the functioning of that individual and not being able to carry out the role effectively, and also impact on the rest of his colleagues. That is in a simple form. That is the simplest way to just describe it. A safety critical.
Can we call it high risk jobs where failure could be potentially very serious, serious?
That's it. So you can have, any role. Let's say somebody like I'll give you an example, a trained driver's role. A trained driver's role is safety critical. A pilot is safety critical. Okay. Even in some decks, there are some desk-based jobs that are safety critical, where you are the controls. At the airport, those who do air control, that's safety critical, because whatever thing that impacts them and making them not to do the job properly can lead to, significant impact on other people, okay, within the employment. That in the simplest form of describing what a safety critical role is. So if you think about any job anybody does, and whether it is desk-based, it is construction, driving, anything that you're doing, where you are, if your health impact is likely to, affect, if there's anything going on with you, and you become, let's say, unconscious, not focused, and the rest of them, and then you are now, that will lead to danger in the rest of the population or the company. That will be in this simplest form. I always like to explain safety critical rather than defining it.
Right, and I think that's a very sensible approach to take, so that people can understand it. Thank you very, very much. So if you're just joining us, this is just 1 minute. If you're just joining us, this is the Medbury webinar talking about the epidemic of drug in the workplace. We have been talking about what types of substances or drugs we are really interested in the workplace, and we've had contributions from Dr. Olusola Olokere, who is a mental health practitioner. We've had contributions from Dr. Ayanate Ephraim, an occupational health physician. We had contributions from Mrs. Omotola Dayo Adetapo, who is an HR professional. Welcome. I know you wanted to say something, Mr. Adela, but I also have something to ask you. Carry on first.
Okay, so I was just going to answer your first question. And I also wanted to thank Dr. Oluwokere on the input around EAP, which is part of what the policy should be speaking to. Also Dr. Ephraim, when he had just defined safety critical roles, I was going to add something to that. So speaking about policy and how we implement it, and thank you, Dr. Oluwokere, for speaking to EAP. Right here in the organizations where I've worked, aside just executing the policy to say, well, this is what the sanction is when you're caught, in that space where you're guilty of substance abuse or anything of the sort. There's also the bit around, we are also interested, we don't just want you to get out of our organization and then go and die. We're also interested in how we have helped you get the help that you need. So in some of those cases that have been discovered, immediately we registered them on the EAP. We have an employer assistance program with our health and welfare benefits with our HMOs. And then for some very extreme cases, they have had to go through rehabilitation. And in one of those cases, I even remember the guy was not totally dismissed. So he was given a medical leave of absence, went on the EAP, went for rehab, came back into the organization because he had been given a clean bill of health, and we're able to do a deep dive, a root cause to how we actually got there. And that's also where, as employers and as HR leaders, empathy comes in. Because just like Dr. Olushola mentioned, a lot of things get to people and they find that drugs and alcohol and tobacco is the way out. Depression, anxiety. Nigeria is hard, let's not lie. The economy is hard. It's getting to people in ways that we can't even imagine. And it got worse after COVID. So that's why you see that from an EAP and welfare employee experience standpoint, the number of cases of people that have to sign up for EAP increased after we came out of the pandemic. So it's a lot more pressure on us, showing empathy, showing that at the end of the day, we see you, we hear you, we care for you, we want you to be better. Yes, you might be posing a risk to the workplace, but at the end of the day, we still want to see how we can help. That's that. I also wanted to say something about, maybe to make it a bit more clearer, high safety risk jobs. When you look at HSE and everything it represents in the workplace, you want to look at physical risk of fire hazard, risk of smoke hazard, risk of trips and falls. Those are the things we do, HSE trainings and everything. We want to ensure that we're in a good place when it comes to such things. High safety risk jobs will be jobs that when you do them, just like Dr. Ephraim has explained, it poses a physical hazard on yourself, on somebody, or the organization in general. Now think about drivers, think about cleaners, think about factory workers. You're operating a machine, and if something happens with you, that machine can explode, something can fall on another person on the production floor. So production workers, technical workers, you man the gen house, you man the electric board in some place. So anything you're doing that is physical, you're not behind your desk in your office and it's just you and your computer. So that's like the easiest way to differentiate and really understand it. For admin guys, maybe your customer service, you're an admin staff, you're in front of your laptop all day, the highest that would happen to you, fall in your office and then they'll carry you. But if you manage a role that has physical impact on the workplace and on people in general, it's a safety risk, and we have to be careful the clean bill of health you bring to that role on a daily basis.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Mrs. Adedap. And I think some organizations these days are widening the definition of safety critical to include sensitive roles that may not even have the traditional safety hazards, but that is so sensitive to the image of the organization, and they will include them, in their testing programs. Okay. I'm not letting you go yet. The reward for good work is more work.
Larry, just a little bit of just two words that can take us, just to add to what she said. So any job you're doing where there's a potential for harm, and also there is a high consequence of if errors or failures occur. Those two things will, we'll use them to classify any, safety critical work.
Fantastic.
Thank you,
Thank you, Dr. Ephraim. Okay, so I think I was coming back to you. So I think we are all, able to agree that the issue of substance use is, for many people, a maladaptive coping strategy that they have used to try to cope with whatever difficulties they are going through. I mean, you talked about the state of the economy, and that is hard for all of us. And that brings me to the subject of alcohol, particularly as alcohol is not in itself, an illegal substance. I mean, people are
Yeah.
able to enjoy alcohol. We know that there is limits for health reasons, but this gentleman refuses to submit himself to alcohol testing because he claims that you are invading on his privacy. And this was a Monday morning, and tells you he's got every right to have drank alcohol over the weekend when he's not working. You didn't catch him with alcohol in the workplace, but you wanted to submit him to testing, and he's challenging it. What do you say to them?
Okay, yes, alcohol, not only is it, I mean, people indulge because of issues, it's also a social activity. I mean, parties, you would find alcohol and all of that. That aside, there's also the bit around, even when you talk of your constitutional rights as a person, there are some things you can't even do constitutionally under the influence. If you're caught driving under the influence and then you kill someone, it's straight to jail. Like, you're already indicted. So everyone knows that alcohol is not a sin, it's not a crime, but there are certain things you should not even think of doing under the alcohol. And if you're caught doing them, criminally, you're indicted. The same applies to the subject of safety critical roles. Per policy, upon recruitment, should be now aware that you've signed or whatever, you've been shown the policy based on your role. You cannot have alcohol. You're a driver, you're a pilot, whatever. Like Dr. Ayanate said, depends on the industry. It then also depends on your role. So yes, you want to go and party hard. You want to, not when it conflicts with your work. So if it's already in the policy, there's already an agreement. There's also the bit around, okay, when we understand that, yes, it's not a crime, and how we, ensure that we are not blurring the lines between people enjoying themselves and not being on the wrong side of the policy. We have TGIF at work, we have parties, we have engagements. Part of the things we know not to do, you don't bring alcohol into the workplace because we're doing TGIF. Again, it's also blurry because alcohol is all big boys, we're enjoying, we're celebrating life and all of that. But when we're in the office, we know where the boundaries are. If we're having a work party outside of the office, by all means. But then we know that maybe it's a Friday, obviously you're not coming back on Monday and you're still hungover from Friday's drinks and whatnot. But again, like it's been already said, the role you do, the role you undertake within an organization, to a very large extent defines what is permissible, what is not permissible, to what extent it is permissible, and what we say around it. Again, what we know, just as how you started the conversation, alcohol is not necessarily a sin. And that's why we have industries that, they produce alcohol and nobody has shut them down and all of that. But even in those organizations, you will be surprised. Yes, they produce alcohol, but they don't necessarily serve it for lunch and say, oh, we're having breakfast, everyone, it's time to eat. And then they're serving beers and spirits and all of that. So, I mean, it's the decorum, is the control, the elements of control, like Dr. Olushola said, and that's what makes the difference.
I'm coming back to you in a moment, and
Yeah.
you said something about TGIFs, and I'm holding that in my left hand. I'll come back to that in a moment. And Dr. Okele, you started to talk about, the societal origin, or maybe, what I can led people to develop this maladaptive, you know, coping skills. And you used two words, which I thought it would be useful for you to explain further: habits and addiction. Okay, well, actually, I will introduce a third one: dependence. When has something moved from being just a habit to being dependence? And when has it moved from being dependence to being addiction? Can you share light on
Okay,
that?
thank you. I think sometimes dependence and addiction is you need to use it, and I think for purpose of for this webinar, habit is just something you do casually and without significant, that you could actually do without doing that habit. Then it becomes dependent when you can't really function without, you are totally dependent, reliant on it to be able to perform your day-to-day functioning. And then when we say someone is addicted or dependent, then the 4 C's are evident there. There's huge compulsion. When people have early morning awakening, when you wake up and the first thing that comes to your mind is this, that is increasing the level of cravings. And the last 2 are actually very, very key. You totally lose sense of what the consequences looks like. Definitely, sometimes it might be staring you in the face, knowing that I cannot drive if I'm under the influence, but you still go ahead and have that drink, clearly knowing that you're going to get in trouble. And that feeds into losing of control. You don't know when and where not to do this habit. So that's like the trajectory of how it goes and how it affects people. And as I said, I touched on how did people get here? And it's important for us to understand that right from teenage years, early years, there's issues around anxiety, undiagnosed mental disorder due to level of stigma. A lot of people are depressed. They are using alcohol. They want to drink away their sorrow. All those kind of things that it will now get to habitual habit. Typically, and I'm not throwing shades on my island people. They say they want to wait for traffic to go down before they go home. They want to do 1 or 2 bottles to cool down. All these things, they initially start at habits, but then it gets to something that you can't control. And for people who dabble into these illicit substances, I think my biggest concern is that you're not sure of what you're taking. It comes in cookies, it comes in this, it comes in colos. They mix all these things without any regulation or any concerns in terms of how the end users, how the impact is going to have on the end users. I did touch briefly on THC and CBD. THC is the bad guy. CBD, people can say it's legal in some parts of the world. And the line is blurring. We have a lot of vapes now. And I'm sure that you can hear vaping has been a lot in the news in the UK in terms of people not really sure of what is in control. So we need to really look at this thing be far beyond the bigger corporates. The weed is there, the other things are there, the painkillers are there that people are addicted to, that they can't function. The diazepams and the things that I know people who can't really talk to the opposite sex unless they've had some level of degree of intoxication or substance in their system. So we need to be aware of how this cuts across board in all forms.
One quick question for you, Dr. Olokere. Thank you so much for that contribution. Your passion is very powerful when you talk about this subject of mental health. And thank you for that. I'll come back to you towards the end of the webinar about EAP, and you talk to us very briefly about the EAP in Nigeria. I think you're the vice president of the society. There's now the consensus within medical community that addiction is not a behavioral issue, rather it is a diagnosis similar to diabetes and similar to hypertension or anything like that. In 1 or 2 sentences, yes or no, and shed light on it.
Yes, I agree. If it's not a diagnosis, it won't be in the ICD-10 or DSM criteria. So they are there in terms of, because what you see is the presentation of people who are addicted. Because if in preparing for this, I was looking at furthermore into the neurological consequences, and I was looking at this part of the brain, the various parts of the brain that all these various substances affect. Progressive cognitive decline as a result of alcohol, the loss of executive functioning, various things that this substance can affect in various delicate areas. And that is when I said issues around age of exposure. It is very, very important. In my opinion, we should be treated with that level of significance and importance that you treat your diabetes and hypertension, because if it was that easy, someone would look at themselves dying and they will still continue. If it was that easy, you can just say, oh, I will stop tomorrow, and they will stop. It is very, very difficult. Currently in my center in Lagos, there's some guy there from a corporate institute who probably does not want to stay, but has had good support from the organization to see them going through this process. So it is a very, very big problem, and it requires a multi-forum, multi-agency kind of support to see this go through successfully.
Thank you. And it's very comforting and refreshing to hear you give examples of organizations who are willing to support their employees that far. And Mrs. Adeda also mentioned what they do in their own organization. And I saw you with the corner of my eye clapping for them because, you know, I don't think many organizations in a labor market like ours, that is obviously oversupplied, you know, will be going to that extent in trying to support employees. So for organizations who do that, please, you have our respect. And for organizations who don't do that and who are quick to chase people away into the society, you know, helplessly, I think you can learn one or two things. And Dr. Ephraim, to yourself, Dr. Okere and Mr. Adedapo, they kept throwing around this terminology under the influence. You and I, being occupational physicians, know that the terminology under the influence has a specific meaning in terms of workplace testing. And basically it's not because I drank something on Friday that, you know, today, Monday, I am still under the influence of that thing. But I think I'm not the one to talk about it. Dr. Ayanate, share your thoughts on that.
Okay. All right. Thanks. Thank you, Larry. So, I mean, what we consider as being under the influence, and it typically refers to, I think, the state in which an individual's behavior, physical and mental capabilities or judgment are impaired due to the consumption of a substance, which can be drugs or alcohol. So you were talking about the individual's behavior, physical and mental capabilities or judgment is impaired due to consumption of a substance, okay? So it is important to note that being under the influence is not solely determined by testing positive for a substance. Although a positive drug or alcohol test can be a strong indicator of a recent use. So the key points to consider when you are talking about under the influence would be observable signs and symptoms. Okay, so whether or not someone is under the influence, you know, you need to observe the individual. So you may be observing for things like slurred speech, impaired coordination, bloodshot eyes, unusual behavior, impaired judgment. So these signs indicate impairment due to the substance the individual has taken. So that in itself is, so that is, so you were looking for observable, you know, signs and symptoms. The other thing is, you know, like I said, a positive test does not, you know, signify of being under the influence. However, in the UK, something like when they do driving tests, okay, would say when you are driving and they do, you know, breathalyzing for you, and they've set a cutoff point, and if you pass that cutoff point, then they will consider it as being under the influence. That is what they do. So that is more or less like, you know, a kind of subjective assessment. Okay, so and you are looking at legal limits. Once there's a legal limit and they test you and you go above the legal limit, that would be considered as you being under the influence. So, but for those of us who are outside, who are not doing tests and the rest of them, it is from the history, maybe what people have noticed in the individual, how the person is behaving and the rest of them. Those are the things that you will, you know, consider, you know, you use as, you know, being somebody being under the influence.
Okay. Thank you so much, Dr. Ayanate. And I think you just talked about the subject of reasonable suspicion in the
Yeah.
workplace, where a manager or an HR person like Mr. Edapo, what will motivate you to suspect that, one of your employees could potentially uh, be using a substance. Great. I think I was coming back to, thank you so much, Dr. Ayanate. I was coming back to you, Mr. Edapo. You talked about TGIF, and that got me thinking. One of the very sticky areas in workplace testing and workplace substance, policy, substance use policy, is the area of company-sponsored events. So a company sponsors an event not within the premises of the organization, maybe at a neutral venue in a hotel somewhere, and the question is, of course, then you yourself admit that you serve alcohol there. The champagne is flowing, the wine, the premium wine is flowing, and people are allowed to make merry. After all, it's our end of year party. Eventually, an incident happens, which following investigation, testing was part of that, and we found that the people involved in the incident, have substances and their metabolites in their system above the legal limit or even the company policy limit. Who is culpable? The organization or the individual? After all, you invited them.
The individual is culpable because if in every advert you would hear for drinks and all that, you still hear them say drink responsibly. And that's the message. Even in company-sponsored events, yes, drinks are available, but nobody will sit down with you to say, Dr. Larry, how many cups have you taken? How many shots have you taken? It's still expected on you as an individual, as an adult, that knows the level of exposure you have to alcohol. The fact that it's there doesn't mean someone has brought it to you to say you must drink. So made it available because we're marrying and because we understand the social influence or the social symbol it is. What the social symbol drinks like that are. But I, as a person, will not go there and go and drink because I normally do not drink. For example, people who understand their level of exposure and the personality that they have and what their lifestyle has been regarding alcohol are not expected to go and overdo, right? So the key word there is you drinking responsibly, number one. Number two is like it was defined, I think it was Dr. Shela or Dr. Ayanate, you asked that they define what under the influence mean. And the key word in that definition or explanation is to the level at which you can function, right? So because we're doing an event, you take 10 bottles and you are downing because you're an adult and no one will stop you. It's on you. If you go to the court of law and say, because my company was doing an event, nobody is going to hold your company to say, company, why did you serve? Because it's expected that you're drinking responsibly. You're responsible for the level of intake and how much it then impacts you to the level where you're now misbehaving and you're doing something that is criminal as a result of what you're taking. I hope that clarifies. Yeah.
It does. It does. Just because we're in a webinar, when we get out of this webinar, I'll take you on further on that one, and we can have an extended conversation on that. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Just to mention that we are now getting to the end of the webinar. Shortly, we will be looking at the response from the polls. So if you haven't responded to the poll, it's a simple one. I think we don't have time to take the two of them, so I think Tibitoka just left it as one. Do quickly respond because in another minute or two, we'll be looking at that. And thereafter, we'll be looking at any questions that have been put into the chat box, and then the discussants will be happy to take those. Then I will ask all of you one final question as we close the webinar. Well, before then, Dr. Shola, very quickly, You are well in the space of mental health advocacy. I know you've been doing a lot of rehabilitation as well. I want to ask you one quickly, and then I want to ask you to talk about the EAP again very quickly. Tell us a few street names of these substances that we may not, for me, I mean, I'm probably too shielded to know too many of these things. Tell us a few of these street names, if you know them. Otherwise, I can, roll it around very quickly.
I think Mr. Derapo did say some earlier, but the common ones, you call it the Igbo, the Kai, the Kolos, they are quite common now. And you have, you know what, the names, the cookies, they put in cookies, they put in various kind of things. So the names are being refined generationally, the Gen Z, it's just going on and on. But I'll let people contribute to more names because the names are just imagining,
they are common. Okay, fair enough. Okay, so yes, Dr. Ephraim, carry on.
I was discussing, I called somebody in Nigeria just to have some ideas about these things. And names like Rufus, Rufus came up. So something like Rufus, that's Rohypnol. They call it Rohypnol. Yeah. They have things like shrooms, magic mushrooms, they have Molly, things like Molly. Which is an MDMA. That's the street name for ecstasy,
Yeah.
Interesting. Purple drank or Sizzop. These are still some of the names. And so they are quite a number. Fried yam, some people, they call weed fried yam, So, there are a lot of things that are going on there. They are manufacturing new names every day.
Absolutely. And I particularly ask the question for our audience, and particularly those of you who may be responsible for leading organizations or HR departments. You need to be aware of some of these things and know that when you hear some of those names, it may be a camouflage for something that people should not normally be allowed to be doing. Okay, that's where I will stop for now. Thank you, everybody. Like I said, I still have one question to go around all the discussants. Or in the meantime, do we have any questions in the chat box? Do we have any questions in the chat box?
I think I did see questions.
Okay, bear with me.
Some of it were answered earlier. The bit around high safety critical roles had been answered already.
All right.
Yeah, okay, yes, I can see it now. Okay, so I will take them very
Yes,
quickly
you have
myself.
some questions, yeah.
Yeah, so the first one, developing an effective drug testing program. Okay, that's a comment. And implementing an effective drug-free workplace program is very important, in my opinion. Great conversation, great webinar. Thank you. I believe that's Dr. Nibogi. Okay, somebody said they call it on Kolos.
That person was referring to me when I was trying to explain the Shisha and the Colorado. Yeah, that was when the comments came in.
Right, okay. Someone then elaborated, they say it's Colorado. Cynthia Uzobo talked about employee assistance program. I wanted you, Dr. Luke, to quickly talk about that. I was almost going to forget that. I'll give you a minute just to quickly talk about that. And then can we highlight the role of MRO? I believe that means medical review officer in the drug testing program. So basically, Cynthia, I believe you are asking the question so that everybody will benefit. The MRO or the medical review officer is a very pivotal function, role within the workplace testing program. And this person is expected to have knowledge of drugs, their metabolism, things like drug interaction, things like the metabolism, and they are the ones that an organization will be depending on to interpret any confirmatory results of samples that have been analyzed in a laboratory. We unfortunately didn't have time to go through the testing program. I had hoped that Dr. Ayanate will be able to do that for us very briefly, to take us through the testing program in a very simplified way. But you could either have a qualitative way of testing, which is you just asking the employee to produce a sample and testing the sample there with what we call a point of contact testing kit, or near patient testing kit. And here and there, similar to your pregnancy test, you will be getting a result. This result is qualitative in nature. It will only tell you whether the sample, the donor sample, has any substance present in it or not. So it's a yes or no thing. If it does tell you that it has something in it, it doesn't tell you the concentration of the substance or its metabolite. And then organizations are required to authorize the provider to send that same sample to the laboratory to get the quantitative values out. Once the quantitative values are out, the result then goes to the MRO, and the MRO process begins, and the MRO looks at the result and could have a need to interview the donor again, and depending on the conversations that go on between the MRO and the donor, the results in front of the MRO, he or she is able to make a statement which is either verified positive or verified negative. So basically that is to simplify the process of the MRO. We talked about safety sensitive and non-safety sensitive. We talked about that. Can we also highlight the different situations for testing in an organization? Right, so I think the process, situations rather, we didn't have time. There's a lot to talk about when we talk about workplace substance testing. And there are a few situations, like you rightly indicated. Mrs. Adedapo talked about when you want to hire people. So sometimes it is relevant for certain categories of jobs that you include substance testing. At another time, it could be because of reasonable suspicion. And Dr. Ayanate gave us some examples of what could lead a manager or an HR person to suspect that somebody could be under the influence at that time. It could even be part of an investigation. An incident has occurred at work, and the employer wants to be sure that substances have no contribution to the incident, and they could be commissioning an investigation that will include testing. Sometimes it is at random, and that is one of the ones that is most difficult to implement, or sometimes companies call it unannounced, where you want to identify certain job categories of people, either because you define them as safety critical or sensitive role, and you want to put these people in a random pool and test them in an unannounced manner. Sometimes it is done when you want to ensure that an employee who has previously been rehabilitated is, remaining sober. And in that case, you want to put them, you want to ensure that they are, compliant with their terms of rehabilitation and the contract they have signed post-rehabilitation for a period of time to be sure that they are not clean. So these are some of the situations in which you can go into workplace substance testing. Somebody said there's a lot of substance abuse issues offshore. That's a shame. That's a shame. The offshore environment of all places should be one that is completely substance-free. But as we say, people find their ways around this. And that will lead me to the last question I will ask all of you. Employees' mental health is key in every organization. Thanks for this webinar. Thank you, Epidemic. Aside the policy, HR needs to ensure employee consent to test is obtained. Absolutely. We obtain consent before the test, and somebody who refuses to test will be dealt with along HR policies, and that could, sometimes be interpreted as, failure to comply with reasonable request. Some organizations will leave it at that. Some organizations, okay, you don't want me to answer it for you, HR.
I want to add to that. Consent is not obtained at the point of testing. It's already part of your recruitment process. upon joining, they consented already. So at any time, any points in time, you can ask for their samples because you already have consent.
Okay. We occupational health physicians,
yeah,
and that's why Dr. Ayanat is joining in. We have a different view.
What we say is that consent is a dynamic thing. So I can give consent 3 days ago, and today you come to me and I say, no, I don't need consent. So consent is dynamic. So you don't, so you need to ensure that you get consent for the activity that you want to carry out.
Absolutely. So that was thank you so much. That was what I wanted to say. It is good to put it in the terms of the contract of the employee. That is true. But in the medical world, generally, particularly in occupational health, as you know, they are not the ones coming to us of their volition. You are the ones sending them to us. We always ensure that consent is contemporary to the task that we are about.
Okay, so sorry. Let me get it correctly. You're referring to the consent you get from them when they are in your facility, not the one HR gets from them. Okay, I was speaking to the one HR gets from them as an employee. I get that. No, that's
definitely.
That absolutely is great, and that will serve into your policy, so that when you need to take an action on them, it will then be a contravention.
So obviously, by all means, you have to get your own consent. I get that. As a medical practitioner, yes. Okay, so it's clear. Thank you.
Absolutely. Okay, great. We are running late. In my humble opinion, being under the influence terminology is a polite way of saying that someone is currently affected by the use of drugs or consciousness altering substance. Thank you so much, Mr. George. I think the definition of it is a bit more technical than that. It goes beyond just being polite. It's an MRO terminology, actually. Reasonable suspicion should be validated with testing before HR can act. Absolutely. Thank you so much for that, Cynthia Zobo. Other names are Port, Alice, Mayor, and that is coming from Adenike Oyelade. Thank you for that. Question: an individual tested non-negative to an illicit substance, and that must be from a doctor. Is the potential employer within their right to not engage on the grounds of the individual's probability of future addiction, even if the confirmatory test shows within legal limits? I think Dr. Ayanate talked briefly about that, and he shared his example, his experience rather, with Rolls-Royce. And an employer is within their right, the point of engaging you at first, to not go ahead if your initial test fails. Okay, they are within their right to not go ahead. Now, the one that most of us have been talking about is when people are already within an employment contract, and you have now a duty of care towards them as an employer. And in that case, it's not always straightforward, and you then need to go as far as you can to support them. And both Dr. Lokere and
Larry, let me just add something briefly on that.
Quickly.
The fact that the individual has tested negative at the point of employment means that that individual is free. I think the question there is that will probability of future addiction be a reason why somebody should not be employed? Okay, so
no, the person tested non-negative.
Non-negative. Okay, so it was positive at the point.
Yes.
All right then.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Use of two negatives sometimes confuse us.
It can be confusing. Yeah.
Should I just say positive?
What are the thoughts on mushroom clinics? This person.
I'm going to answer that one quickly. I'm going to answer that one.
Which question do you want to talk about?
Clinics.
Okay, let me read the question first. I see your eagerness, and thank you for that. What are your thoughts on mushroom clinics and other legal clinics that administer psychedelics, for example, ketamine therapy? Dr. Lokere, very quickly.
So thank you. Currently, I'm a principal and investigator and a sub-investigator
for the elders
on a global studies that is looking into psychedelic treatment and mental health. Basically, there's one currently going on in the UK. that I'm a sub-investigator on, and we're in the conference in Netherlands recently. So that is a booming market. To the psilocybin is the hallucinogenic in magic mushroom. So we are looking at how we can use that psilocybin in treatment of depression. It is still in early stages in the UK. America, they've gone far ahead and they are already doing some of these things, and it is legal. So I might be able to give you more information if that person really wants to know. But in the UK, we are looking at it in postnatal depression and also PTSD to see the minimal effective doses. It's a phase 2 study, and it is very interesting. That is where the future of treatment of mental disorder might actually end up in, but it's still in early phases.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. I think no one better than you can talk to that then.
That's
Thank
his
you.
area.
That's
Well
his area,
done.
right. Will the recording of this discussion be made available to the attendees? I believe yes, I can answer yes to that, I believe. It will be nice if we can get the recording. Okay, so that's the same question. Okay, thank you so much. So to our poll, before my final parting words, Temitope, do you want to read the result of the poll, or you want to just say comment on two on that?
I'll just read the result of the poll. Okay, so the question asked was, what drugs are the most commonly abused at the workplace? And our options, we have cocaine or crack as number 1, marijuana or weed as number 2, tramadol as number 3, alcohol as number 3, and monkey tail as number 5. Okay, so for we have 5% say cocaine or crack are the most commonly abused. 52% say marijuana or weed are the most commonly abused. 38% say tramadol is the most commonly abused. 81% say alcohol is the most commonly abused, and 10% say monkey tail is the most commonly abused. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And that is from the pool of over 40 people that may have responded to that. We don't know, how valid that is. That needs to be tested more widely to be able to validate those responses. Final questions, Dr. Ayana, Dr. Lokere, Mrs. Adida. We all have talked about how the substance use landscape has been dynamic, in recent times, and how people who use this substance keep innovating ways of using them, and indeed new substances being modified and brought, to the market. You talked about laughing gas. That is one that is more recent, and that is this balloon thing you talked about. And I think they are all generally called, psychoactive substances or psychedelic substances. And Dr. Oke talked about
Psychoactive, yeah.
psilocybin. Yeah, psilocybin. My question is, yes or no? Just yes or no? With ladies going first. Is our current workplace substance testing policy adequate in today's workplace? Yes or no?
I would say we're not there yet. It's a journey.
It's a no. Thank you. Dr. Lokere, our workplace testing policy relevant for today? Yes or no?
No.
Good. Good man. Thank you. Dr. Ayanate, yes or no?
Needs improvement. No.
You're a politician. No. Great. And
Our no HP. It needs
all
improvement.
for fantastic. Thank you all for a very wonderful evening. We cannot thank you enough, Dr. Olopere. We cannot thank you enough, Ms. Adedapo and Dr. Ayanate Ephraim, for discussing this very relevant topic with us today. And to you all, our participants and guests, those who have questions, those who have made comments, and those who have just attentively listened to us. Thank you for deciding to share your Saturday evening with us this way. We hope we can count on you to attend one of our future webinars again next time. But until then, it's bye-bye for now. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much for having me. Take care, everybody.
Thank you
Bye.
so much, Dr.
Bye.
Larry Ajayi and
Okay.
all the other panelists. Thank
Well
you,
done.
everyone.
Well done.
Enjoy your
Okay.
evening. Bye, everyone.
Will do. Bye now.
Thank you. Bye.
Bless everyone.